Good day, folks. Morning in America, January 30th, 2025. 43 years after the Air Florida disaster, when an aircraft flew into the 14th Street Bridge, killing all but 4 of those aboard. All who were in the tail section of the aircraft survived. An horrific situation, an eerily similar situation in which it appears that all life was lost in a mid-air collision between U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter designed for VIP transport and a regional jet coming out of Wichita, Kansas. Stay tuned as we discuss the impact and what we know at this hour here on the Wyatt Independent News Network.
I'm saying bye to all the lies and all the times you cried, saying that I wasn't right, yet I was right by your side. You manipulator, playing games, your friends commentators, and I don't know what you say about our private conversations, but it's got them hating. Thanks to all the rumors you be claiming. It's cool, I'm done with you, so they can throw you a celebration. You gon' hate it when you see me with somebody living better. I'm trying to tell you that me just doing me gon' have you jealous.
Horrific scenes unfolded over the skies of Washington, D.C. last night, approximately 8:48 in the evening, when a mid-air collision took place. In this video footage from the Kennedy Center, that views the Kennedy Center, I should say, you can see an aircraft taking off on the bottom right quadrant. And then below that, you will see an aircraft and another that run right into each other. This is absolutely horrific. 20 seconds of video here. There's the explosion. And there it is, a repeat. You can see the one approaching the other. Boom, right there, mid-air collision. Welcome back to the program, folks. A somber day here in the United States and for many people around the world. Thoughts and prayers to loved ones who lost their family members, and to the aviation community for one of the most horrific aviation disasters in recent American history. Last night, an aircraft carrying 64 passengers and crew from Wichita, Kansas, a Bombardier CRJ 700 series aircraft, mid-air collision. There are no unusual factors or circumstances we're aware of in this crash. It was clear night. Visibility was for miles and miles, and winds were not a problem. The tower was in contact with aircraft. One of the problems we're going to find out, I suspect, whenever these mishaps occur, typically it's more than one cause. Sadly, unfortunately, already today, President Trump appears to be blaming the military pilot for the crash, and the transcript of air traffic control tower communications with aircraft in the air would give people that impression. But the problem is that the initial reports on the transcript were not complete, as the helicopter most likely was speaking on UHF frequency, vice the VHF frequencies that the commercial aircraft were on. Both were communicating to the tower, and he did not hear the voice recordings from the helicopter. There are a number of reasons why that could be the case. Malfunction, more likely it has something to do with security, but hopefully we'll find out in the coming days. But at this hour, there appear to be 0 survivors from this horrific situation. Let me get into it. We'll talk about what we know at this hour, folks. It's a sad day for so many people in so many ways, and it's very frustrating. Sean Duffy, the new transportation secretary, who replaced Pete Buttigieg for this administration, was only in his first full day as the Secretary of Transportation, and this is what he has to deal with. Last night, at about 1 a.m. in the morning, Muriel Bowser, the mayor of D.C., held a press conference with Secretary Duffy and with officials from Fire Rescue and EMS in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And they told us very little about what happened. They told us what they knew. There will be further press briefings today. In approximately 1 hour, Reagan National Airport will reopen for business. It's been shut since this occurred last night, so it'll be over a 12-hour shutdown in one of the busier airports in the United States. It's truly horrific. No survivors expected. Let's get to the news stories on this, and then we'll discuss it. And also, I'll read the transcript to you from the aircraft in communication with the tower that has been released to the public, or at least came off of air traffic control recordings. No survivors expected after mid-air collision between passenger jet and Army helicopter. No one is believed to have survived the mid-air collision between the two. Emergency authorities have switched to recovery effort after it says 28 bodies here, but that's been updated. It's now at least 30 bodies have been found. Officials are confident they will recover the bodies of those killed in this collision. The jet was carrying 64 people while 3 soldiers were aboard the helicopter. The helicopter was on a training flight. Several members of the figure skating community were also aboard the jet, according to the U.S. Figure Skating. Separately, Russia's state news agency said that 2 world champion Russian figure skaters were on the plane and have been lost. The mayor of Wichita, Kansas, Lily Wu, said that D.C. and Wichita will be forever uniting after last night's deadly crash. We mourn with all those who've been impacted. This is a terrible tragedy that will unite those in Washington and Wichita forever. United States senators muted criticism about the packed airspace, the congested airspace over Washington, D.C., which is challenging. U.S. senators who previously expressed concern about airspace had the following said: "We've raised the issue continuously. We get very busy airspace," said Senator Mark Warren from Virginia. "I think we'll ask questions, but at the appropriate time. We're in this period right now where families are being notified. We're trying to figure out what happened." This mid-air collision over the Potomac is the worst aviation disaster since November 12th, 2001, when an American Airlines flight crashed in New York, killing all 260 people on board. That came just 2 months after the terrorist attack on 9/11. American Airlines Flight 587 plummeted into the Belle Harbor, Queens. Despite initial concerns, the National Transportation Safety Board found no evidence of sabotage. It was the highest death toll for a single airliner crash in U.S. history. All 260 people on board were killed, along with 5 people on the ground. As I said, officials now turn their focus towards recovery. The photograph you see there with a Huey helicopter flying over the Potomac is a view looking onto Bowling Air Force Base, and that's residential housing on the base. Where the emergency vehicles are along the river there is a path that I used to run on daily when I was stationed at Bowling Air Force Base 20 years ago, working for the Defense Intelligence Agency. As I mentioned, no survivors expected from this crash. Absolutely horrific situation. The American Airlines jet carrying 64 people plunged in the Potomac after colliding midair with an Army helicopter. Recovery teams had pulled more than 2 dozen bodies. The total is over 30 now. Gravelly Point, a park just a few hundred feet from the north end of the runway at Reagan National Airport, has been closed. For decades, it's been a spot favored by aviation aficionados who count aircraft coming and going, as well as picnickers. Governor Lori Kelly of Kansas said in a statement that she had been in contact with federal, state, and local officials about the crash. She's deeply saddened by the tragic loss of lives and extends her deepest condolences to the victims and loved ones of the families. Let me see if I can open this up and get a better image here for you guys. That's not going to work. I have to do it this way. It's not playing nice. So I'm trying to, whoops. I'm trying to reload this page. Shoot. Hang on a second here. Something happened there. What happened? Come on. What happened here? I lost the image. What the heck? How did that happen? The image just disappeared there. Well, I've lost that map, unfortunately. I apologize for that. I'll try to find it again. That's really unfortunate. I was going to show you that map. There it is. That's what I wanted. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is probably one of the best graphics that we're going to find on this. Okay, and you're going to see the plane, and you're going to see where this took place. So let me show this to you very quickly. All right, so here is a map of the area. On the left-hand side is Reagan National Airport, very small airport physically, located in Virginia, just across from Washington, D.C. On the right-hand side, behind the red and purple flight paths of the 2 aircraft, is Bowling Air Force Base. You'll see a lot of squiggly lines. Those are roads or residential areas throughout the area, but not many lines where that red line passes. That's because that's a military base, and those streets won't be shown on there. I used to run exactly where that plane crashed, along that river. The military helicopter, the path of the helicopter coming down from D.C. along the Potomac, they flew right down the middle of the Potomac, then went around the barrier island in southern D.C., went past Fort McNair, which is also a military base located just north of Bowling Air Force Base, and then for some reason turned inward towards Reagan National and then adjusted their path. And the last recorded locations before the collision are right there. Now we're going to take a look at this. This is the runway approach, runway 33 at Reagan National Airport. You can see the 33 on there perhaps as you come in over the Potomac River. And that's the direction that the commercial flight was headed. And that photograph shows you Bolling Air Force Base in the foreground. And you see the path of the plane as it turned and the helicopter and the last recorded locations. So they hit moments almost instantaneously after this. Helicopter was an altitude of 200 feet. And the plane was descending for approach on that runway. Is Trump going to address the public? When is he going to do it? Let me see if I can't find that. Okay, I just saw that. Trump. Trump to address the nation. Let me see. No. Where are you getting that from? I mean, he's bound to do it, but are we getting an announcement of a time now? Yeah, Donald Trump and Sean Duffy are both saying that it was preventable. I'm not seeing anything. Is it on the White House? Let me see. See if the White House has it. News. Let's go there. No, there's nothing there. There's nothing. I'm not sure where you're getting that from. Awkward, Leon. At this time, it's premature to lay blame. Although it looks like the president, transportation secretary, certainly the president is trying to lay blame on the military, and that's unfortunate. As I said, in air mishaps like this, oftentimes it's multiple factors that play a role here. It may be the fact that they were on different networks and the aircraft weren't in communication with one another. May have been another issue here, but it's certainly not a situation in which it was poor weather, low visibility, high winds, or anything at all like that. Yeah, that's just that. I think the air traffic control ATC is going to come in for some scrutiny on this one here, and it doesn't appear the instructions were given properly. But this is just speculation. We don't know. It's best to wait and see. Let me address the chat very quick, and I'll get back to that map in a moment. Hey Val, Tulsi Gabbard and Cash Patel's hearing today. That's correct. This is my industry. I will repeat it. Never, ever, ever move the safety guardrail. Never, ever do cost-cutting safety. It's absolute madness. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. When you're playing with hand grenades and aircraft, you don't mess around. It's a serious business, very serious business. Steak says, sorry for my anger, but this is why the safety procedure exists. This is so heartbreaking. It is. It's absolutely, and it appears to have been wholly unnecessary. It put me very much in mind of the Air Florida crash that occurred when I was a youth, at the age of 17. January 10th, 1982, just before I graduated high school, the Air Florida aircraft took off with wings that were overlaid with heavy icing as a consequence of too much time on the runway, poor de-icing procedures, and then the failure of the pilot in command to adhere or listen to his co-pilot, who was telling him that they weren't getting sufficient thrust to get the aircraft in the air, and ignored those warnings. The plane shook violently going down the runway, which had been ice and snow covered, and managed to get aloft, but for all of about 17 to 30 seconds, and then it couldn't get in the air. The co-pilot said, we're going to crash. And then the pilot said, I know. And that's the last you heard as the metal crushed into the 14th Street Bridge, killing all but four. Well, actually 6 or 5 people that survived it, but one sacrificed his life to rescue others because he was pinned in the wreckage, couldn't get out, and he drowned eventually, unfortunately. It was an amazing rescue effort by passersby, by the D.C. Park Police, it was unbelievable. Helicopters flying out there trying to lift people out of the water who were exhausted and suffering almost from hypothermia at that point. The water temperature was near freezing. You can't last very long in that. 15 or 20 minutes, you start losing your faculties in that kind of water. And after an hour and a half, most people are already dead. You can't survive that long. It's amazing. It's unbelievable. Horrific situation. Yeah, so are you still there, Steak? Stick around with us. Yeah, Arctic is also in aviation. I have a lot of experience with aviation. I'm not an aviator, but I have a lot of experience with aviation. I'm familiar with many of the factors that involve flight dynamics, and also mission planning and such. But this appears to have been a tragedy that was entirely preventable. Let's watch that video again, and I'll bring it up here in just a second. Where'd it go? All right, it's not showing up. There it is. Took me a moment to find it. So again, I'll pause this as we go through it and talk about it. I'm going to leave myself off the camera because you need to be able to see what's going on. Actually, I can put myself a little bit higher here. Let me do that very quickly here. So this is just a effort to give some feedback to people who are not in the United States, let you know what's happening. So this is a view from the Kennedy Center. The bright, shiny thing you see in there, that's the Lincoln Memorial. And you're looking across there. That's the Lincoln Memorial, okay? So here we have a plane taking off, and that's the bright spot in the bottom there in the air. And then another bright light, which is the aircraft approaching the runway, apparently. And then you see something from behind or side come up along it and a mid-air collision. This is absolutely horrific. Again, this is Kennedy Center camera. There you see, see that plane taking off, and there's the explosion down there. We'll zoom in now, and then they fall into the Potomac. Okay, so let me pause it right there. All right, if you look just below my image, you'll see a light, faint dot above a big white spot, which is a building. That's the helicopter, apparently. And then the Bombardier jet with the bright light. You can see the one taking off on the right-hand side. So let me advance that just a little bit, and you'll see as it approaches here. See that approach? Look at that. And you see the light flash on that aircraft as it approaches. That's the helicopter, surely. There's no way that that's the commercial aircraft. It's simply too small. And this is frightening. And here's the moment of impact. A horrific fireball. We understand now that the fuselage of the PSA flight is in 3 pieces in the Potomac in approximately 7 feet of water. The difference between this and the Air Florida crash is that the Air Florida, the Potomac was frozen over because the temperatures had been low for some time. Yesterday, the temperatures approached 60 degrees Fahrenheit, which is something around the order of 10, 12 degrees Celsius. So the river wasn't frozen. It was freezing in temperature, but just above frozen. Absolutely horrific situation there, folks, and you can see it land in the Potomac. When they gave the briefing last night, we heard from Sean Duffy and others saying that this was a flight that was not survivable. This collision was not survivable. There were initial reports last night that 4 people were rescued. I don't know where those reports came from. That's one reason why I was very reticent to report on this, but it was breaking news. I did a quick story and did no speculation in it. I just said it was odd to see what happened there because it was an odd situation. But speculation is never good. We now know there are no survivors from that crash, and the recovery efforts are underway. And here's another map. You can see where the crash occurred, and Bolling Air Force Base directly across from where it was at. Runway 33 was the approach. Unbelievable. President Trump said in a social media post, "May God bless their souls." Yeah. Terrible situation. President Trump said, why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking if they saw the plane? That is a good question. Hang on a second. Here's an update. Trump is going to speak at 11 o'clock. So that'll be what I start my news program with at the top of the next hour. We'll go live with President Trump, and we'll hear what he has to say about this. Yeah. Terrible situation. So the military were on a training flight. It's a required night evaluation with a fairly experienced crew. This was a VIP flight that flies officials from the Pentagon back and forth between Northern Virginia and other military installations around there and downtown to D.C. for meetings at the Capitol building and in the Situation Room at the White House and such, the Eisenhower office building, all those things. So the Black Hawk helicopter collided was on an annual proficiency training flight. Pentagon is withholding names and ranks of the crew members until next of kin are notified. It was a fairly experienced crew that was doing an annual required night evaluation, and they did have night vision goggles. And if they did, that could also explain one thing that would be a problem with night vision goggles. You'll get blinded by those headlights on a commercial aircraft flying directly at it. So that could have been a problem if they were flying with the goggles on. 12th Aviation Battalion is currently on an operational pause until what happened is evaluated. The crew included 1 officer, a warrant officer, and a crew chief, according to National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. The International Olympic Committee president is deeply saddened by the air incident. Thomas Bach said, "We're deeply saddened by the tragic air accident in Washington, D.C. On behalf of the International Olympic Committee, and personally, I extend my heartfelt sympathies to all those affected, which you understand include Olympians, young athletes, and their support staff." Tough stuff. Tough stuff. As I said, everyone is expected to be dead. It's at this hour, it'd be impossible to find anyone who's still alive. There'll be no miracles from this tragedy. Everyone aboard the American Airlines jet carrying 60 passengers, 4 crew members, that collided with the Black Hawk was feared dead. We're now at the point where we're switching from rescue to recovery, said John Donnelly, the fire chief in D.C. We don't believe there are any survivors. The body of the plane was found upside down in 3 sections in waist-deep water. The wreckage of the helicopter was also found. Donnelly said first responders on Thursday were searching an area of the Potomac as far south as the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, 3 miles south of the airport. Yeah. All right, so let me go a few more things we need to know about this. The regional jet was from Wichita, Kansas, and that flight had been scheduled for about a year after a U.S. senator encouraged American Airlines to start a daily service from Wichita to the nation's capital. Russian state media did confirm that Russian figure skaters and coaches were aboard the aircraft. Daylight shows wreckage in the Potomac. I mean, it's just absolutely horrific scene there, folks. I know that's difficult to see. There's a picture from Potomac as the sun came up this morning, and you can see parts of the aircraft lying there, and a small boat is out in the water outside of Bolling Air Force Base. Horrific situation. No black boxes have been recovered yet. Aviation expert John Cox and Jeff Gazzuti, former National Transportation Safety Board and Federal Aviation Administration investigator, analyzed the events. It was a clear night. Visibility was excellent. Winds were not an issue. Transportation Secretary says the crash was preventable. Absolutely preventable. The helicopter and civilian were in a standard pattern last night, and there was standard communication between the aircraft and the air traffic control, and the experienced pilots were involved. Everyone was standard in the lead up to the crash. To back up what the president said, what I've seen so far, I do think this was preventable. Absolutely. As I said, the airport will reopen 11 o'clock, which is when President Trump will now be speaking, and we will cover that live. Recovery Center has been set up to receive human remains. Horrific. And recovery operations continuing in the Potomac at this hour. As I mentioned, figure skaters were on board that flight. Their coaches and family members were passengers on the American Airlines jet that collided with the helicopter. U.S. Figure Skating can confirm that several members of our skating community were sadly aboard American Airlines Flight 5342. We're devastated by this unspeakable tragedy and hold the victims' families closely in our hearts. They're heartbroken. Their figure skaters, along with their families, friends, and coaches, are understood to be among those on board, said the global governing body, International Skating Union. Less than 30 seconds before the crash, the air traffic controller asked the helicopter if he had the arriving plane in sight. The controller made another radio call. The helicopter, Pat 25, passed behind CRJ seconds after that 2 aircraft collided. Some 300 first responders were on the scene moments after this. The initial call came in within 6 minutes for emergency services, and less than 10 minutes after the midair collision, emergency services were on scene at Bolling Air Force Base, which in itself is absolutely amazing. I can only speculate that the fire department and emergency services and paramedics on duty at Bolling Air Force Base, directly adjacent to this crash, responded instantaneously because it's impossible to get there in 4 minutes otherwise, or 10 minutes otherwise. And then D.C. Metro also arrived there, and folks throughout suburban Maryland and Northern Virginia arriving on the scene. There were fire trucks, ambulances, and sadly, all for naught, as it appears that no one survived that horrific crash. So I do have the transcripts of that recorded last night. Now, this, bear in mind, does not include the UHF transcript. This is the VHF. At least I believe. Let me see if they've added in here. Blue Streak 5342 is the bombardier jet. Pat 25 is the helicopter. So, 4 minutes prior to the crash, Tower, Blue Streak 5342 on Mount Vernon Visual Runway 1. Blue Streak 5342, Washington Tower, winds are 320, 17G25. Can you take runway 33? So they diverted them to an alternate runway. There's a pause. They look to see if they're able to do it. And they say, yeah, we can do runway 33 for Blue Streak 5342. Blue Streak 5342, Wilson Bridge, make the turn for 33. Cleared to land. Excuse me. The aircraft responded, changed to runway 33, cleared to land 33, blue streak 5342. Now, other traffic was being handled on runway 1. Approximately 2.5 minutes before the crash, the helicopter, Pat 25 Memorial Tower, Pat 25 Roger. Now, that's on the VHF frequencies. They're also on UHF. Tower, Pat 25 traffic just south of Wilson Bridge is CRJ at 1,200 feet, turning for runway 33. Helicopter responded. Pat 25 has the traffic in sight, requests visual separation. Tower, visual separation approved rather than instruments. Tower, American 1631, winds are, and they couldn't understand what they said, no delay. Traffic on 3 Mile final for runway 33, cleared for immediate takeoff. Cleared for takeoff, AA 1631, that's American Airlines flight. Approximately 10 seconds prior to the crash. Tower, Pat 25, do you have CRJ in sight? Tower, Pat 25, CRJ. It's unclear. It's maybe they said pass behind. It's at this situation that a lot of scrutiny is going to be taken over the air traffic control, the helicopter, and the commercial jet, but primarily air traffic control and the helicopter. Why did it go from a full minute plus, minute 20, to 10 seconds prior to the mid-air collision before the tower attempted to contact the helicopter again? Perhaps because the helicopter had said they had them in sight. I'm not sure. I don't imagine they would have had the night vision goggles on if they're approaching a flight path. Now, both aircraft were in approved flight paths, so there was no deviation from that apparently, so we'll see. And then the aircraft said, affirm, Pat 25 has traffic in sight, request visual, I already got that, sorry. Visual separation. Tower separation, 15 seconds later. Tower, American Airlines 472, couldn't hear it. American 472, Washington Tower. Then alarm start going off. Ooh, oh my God. 15 seconds later, one of the aircraft in the air, another aircraft in the flight pattern said, Tower, did you see that? The tower frantically began commanding go-arounds and deconfliction of the airspace. Someone screwed up here royally, folks. Whether it was the military helicopter, it was the electronics, it was the communications, or it was the air traffic control, someone screwed up badly. The left is already running around blaming Trump for it and saying he's cut the Federal Aviation Administration. Untrue. This is really sick that people would do such things. I'm also disappointed here, President Trump apparently blaming the military when we don't know the facts. It may very well be the military is responsible, but there's a lot of concern. There was one very concerned traffic controller. To me, it starts there. The plane pilots were focusing on the landing. Exactly. The air traffic controller responsible for what happens out there. Both aircraft were in approved flight paths. The deconfliction is a responsibility. I mean, ultimately, it's the pilots, but that commercial flight, there's little they could have done. And quite frankly, that helicopter coming at them in the dark as they made that banking turn over bowling, coming across the Potomac, because it's obvious it looks like we're hit broadside, not from the rear, based on where the flight patterns were, the flight paths, I should say. Then it's very unlikely they would have seen the helicopter even as it hit them. Why the helicopter didn't see or didn't respond, no idea. Again, these are very experienced pilots. Arctic says no notification from YouTube. Well, Arctic, we've been here discussing it. I've just ran through the ATC transcripts from last night. They do not include UHF frequencies. It's just the VHF. Look, I'm not going to assign blame. President Trump will be speaking at 11 o'clock. I'll be carrying that live on the next broadcast as I do the news. The intent of that broadcast was to cover the events in South Africa, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and all that's unfolding there. But now it looks like I'm going to have to switch over and cover President Trump's speaking, and we'll hear what he's got to say. Arctic, I sent you those transcripts last night that were available. I don't know if they've been updated. There is some very disturbing situation. You've flown in that airspace. You know what it's like. It's highly congested. It's heavily trafficked. In addition, there's a lot of restricted airspace because of federal aviation restrictions over federal buildings and key points there. Yes, Look, people are already trying to blame the military pilots. We don't know that that's the cause, but we do know that this was a pretty horrific situation, and it clearly looks like it could have been prevented, whether it was a communications failure between the tower and the helicopter or the commercial aircraft or all three, or whether it was a communications failure with the VHF radio failing or them not talking on UHF. I don't know. But there does appear to be a serious cock-up here on somebody's part, and unfortunately, it's cost the lives of probably 67 people. 3 on the Black Hawk helicopter, a VIP transport helicopter, which was doing a night training flight, an annual requirement. A very experienced crew with 1 commissioned officer, 1 warrant officer, and a enlisted crew chief. And then the commercial aircraft with 64 passengers and 4 crew members. Flying along Potomac River, standard routing for helicopters, low level as it keeps them away from buildings and towers. Correct, Arctic. I know. I've flown in helicopters on those paths. I know the area. I worked at Bowling Air Force Base. Marine One is stationed there. And that was my first concern. When first it was initially reported, I did a quick video on this as it broke last night. I was on the radio doing my news program, Conservative, Common Sense Conservatives, when this crash occurred, and didn't hear about it until a few minutes after 9 p.m. after I got off air. When I found out about it, I quickly got what facts were available. There was video footage from the Kennedy Center, which showed the explosion there, which I've shown here. I quickly did an analysis of what information was available, trying not to speculate and get people overly excited. Put it up as breaking news. Unfortunately, YouTube hides that content, so almost nobody's seen it. But I put that up and then began to look into what was going on. I have run along that river. You're going to see photographs, and you'll see commercial housing in the background. Those are military quarters for families on Bowling Air Force Base, and I've run along that river many times. I went to the attaché course at that school. I worked there as an intelligence analyst, and so I ran along the river. I didn't like running along the river because the wind was pretty brutal, so I typically ran around the base and up in the hills, but I ran around that river many times, and I've also flown there. I've flown in commercial aircraft and in helicopters, and it is, in fact, that's normal. That's what's so disturbing about this. This is not unusual for military aircraft to do that. Like I said, when it was first reported, they said it was a police helicopter, which seemed odd, and while I was recording the video, the press secretary for the White House, Caroline Leavitt, went on Fox News and said that it was confirmed that it was a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter, UH-60. And so I put the text in the video to say that was actually what it was, because we didn't have that as I was recording it. So yeah, the information changes, so you do your best to report on it. But this is, everything was standard. So what was the deviation? I guess we're going to find out. Flying along Potomac standard. Yeah, it is. It seems that Pat 25 had his transponder on, as we saw radar screens showing call sign out to the helicopter. Yeah, which is another thing. Last night there was speculation that had his transponder off. I don't know why it would have his transponder off. Also, these Black Hawk helicopters are equipped with different types of radios, UHF, VHF. We have one particular network called Half Quick, which allows them to talk to jet fighters from the Air Force. And not all of the Black Hawks, when I was in the Army years ago doing aviation, had Half Quick. But these VIP aircraft, I would expect to be equipped with all transponders, all radios that they need to communicate with civilian communication, civilian community, because that's where they're operating there. Very strange. Anyone who flies for that VIP unit has thousands of hours of flight time and night experience, and most of them are also combat tested, just as a consequence. Yeah, VHF was used. Yeah, well, there was speculation there was UHF because there was no response. I couldn't get the inside scoop. Seems my brothers are extremely busy at the moment. Oh, thank you, Drunken Yoda. Oh, you mean the NTSB guys? Yeah. People do not know if there was equipment malfunction, so reserve comments from when. Yeah, exactly, PK. Well, people are speculating here, but nobody's laying any blame in our conversation, in our chat, and I appreciate that. But the reality here is that there's going to be a lot of questions that need to be addressed here and answered. No civilian tower aircraft has UHF. You're correct, Arctic, but the UH-60 is equipped with UHF, and if their VHF radio went out, I'm not saying it did. If it did, then you have no option but to try to find someone on the UHF frequency. I don't know if they're in communication with their own ground station when they're flying or not. So anyway, it's just, we don't know. I mean, it was perfectly clear night. It's beautiful skies. Visibility had to be miles and miles and miles. And everything seemed to be going right until it all went horribly wrong. It appears, based on the maps that we saw and the point of impact, it appears that the bombardier had banked to turn to come across the Potomac when it was struck broadside or in the tail somewhere by the Black Hawk helicopter. Yeah, VHF seems to be working fine until the point of impact. The transponder seems to be working. This crew had night vision goggles, although I don't understand why they'd be flying with night vision goggles with that much illumination out there. They're not particularly useful. I understand why they have to be qualified for it, but you're going to want to fly into Northern Virginia somewhere to do night vision stuff. So I don't know. What I can tell you is that this is a absolutely horrific situation, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, there are no survivors to our knowledge. At this point, it would be impossible physiologically impossible to survive in that near freezing water for so long. And again, it reminds me very much of the Air Florida situation when I was a 17-year-old kid, and the Air Florida aircraft took it into the 14th Street Bridge after being heavily iced. Really sad situation. So let me show you some of the photos from that back in the day. This is the tail section of the Air Florida aircraft that crashed into the 14th Street Bridge, and that's the portion where the survivors were. They survived that. They survived that. The rest of the crew didn't, and passengers. And you can see that the Potomac was frozen. The only reason that there's moving water is because they broke it up, that barge, to get out there and pull the stuff out. So that's the tail section. And here's the 20 seconds to disaster. Air Florida 737 jet liner is de-iced about 45 minutes before being cleared for takeoff. It starts down runway 36. Eyewitnesses observed ice on the wings and fuselage. And ironically, the local ABC news station, their reporters were at the airfield that night. It was just called National Airport then. It wasn't called Reagan National Airport. At National Airport, and they were there because of the poor weather conditions, and they were doing a feature on de-icing of aircraft in poor weather. So they're actually at at National Airport, and they filmed that Air Florida jet as it pulled away and taxied to go down the runway. They did not know. And in fact, one of the reporters, two of their neighbors were on that flight and didn't survive. So when they got the call from their headquarters, the plane had crashed because they didn't see it from inside the terminal. They were directed quickly to get up there. They went the wrong direction. They drove on the South African side of the road. The road was shut down. There's no one. They drove up to the 14th Street Bridge, got out, and went out on the bridge to a point where the guardrail had been knocked off by the plane when it struck the bridge, and then looked down into the water and saw what was happening. It was truly horrific. Lifting off from the 6,870-foot long runway, the airplane heads due north, then makes a shallow left turn. It fails to climb properly, but clears two bridges spanning Potomac River 4,000 feet north of the runway. With the nose up and the tail down, the jetliner smashes into commuter traffic on the northbound span of the 14th Street Bridge. Damaged aircraft hits the frozen river. The tail section and main fuselage are separated by 200 feet. The ice gives way under the wrecked plane, which sinks into 26 feet of frigid water. You can see there how the plane hit the 14th Street Bridge and hit cars on the bridge. Shattered wreckage was there. And then the fuselage sank down. The tail section, which was lighter, stayed on the ice for a bit, and some people, 4 passengers and 1 crew member, were rescued. One of whom, a 6th one, could have survived, but he gave up his life. He was pinned in the wreckage and couldn't extract himself from the seat and was hailed as a hero. And the bridge is actually named after him now. He was a banker in D.C. What a truly horrific situation that was. Well, folks, that's the news of this situation at this day. Air Florida captain was unfamiliar with anti-icing procedures and limitations, hence improperly de-iced his plane, bad knowledge. Yeah, exactly. Well, there's also, based on the cockpit voice recorder, they're also either they had gallows humor or he disregarded what was going on. The co-pilot cautioned and warned repeatedly in the cockpit. You can hear it in the transcript, read it in the transcript about, he said that they weren't getting sufficient thrust basically to get into the air, and he was correct. And what a tragedy. They managed to clear 2 bridges, but not that 3rd one. Unbelievable. I remember watching that live. One standby stripped off, dived in. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What happened with that is that the helicopter, the Park Service helicopter that came over there, it's not a rescue helicopter, but this crew went down to the tail section and dropped ropes in the water, and they had one life preserver to try to drag people out. And by the time they started getting people out, they were so exhausted from the near hypothermia that they just couldn't hold on. And one lady fell back in. They drug her across the water, and she couldn't hold on. She let go, and a bystander stripped off his jacket, dove in, and saved her. President Reagan honored him 12 days later at the State of the Nation address. Still alive, that gentleman, in his 70s today. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, folks, pretty crazy stuff, wouldn't you say? Pretty crazy stuff. 83 people currently here. Thanks, folks. Please hit the like button if you don't mind. Tragic news, but the news must be reported. They must hear about it. Yet to come today, we have Neil DeBeer on the program later today, but at the top of the hour in about 18 minutes, President Trump is scheduled to speak about this tragedy, and I will cover that live right here on the program, provided we can get the feed, which shouldn't be a problem. But once again, I'm going to show you this horrific video. This is from the Kennedy Center, one of the most heavily recorded and videoed and photographed parts of the world, the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, particularly down by the mall at Potomac and Anacostia Rivers. This is really unfortunate, but it is what it is. And I know it's a trite phrase, but let's talk about this. So here we go. Excuse me. Again, the Kennedy Center camera, and you can see in the foreground, that is the Lincoln Memorial, and off on the left-hand side, a little bit to the left, is the Jefferson Memorial, that round dome in the bottom left-hand corner. Those are illuminated heavily at night by the Park Service, and you can see the bridges over the Potomac where traffic is coming in and out. So let's go ahead and take a look at this video. So you see an aircraft taking off there, and then there's the collision right there, midair. Only a few hundred feet off the ground. You almost don't see it. Look how close. There's the helicopter approaching, and I suspect they're hitting it mid-air right about there. That's just horrible, horrible. Look at all the traffic on the bridges crossing over the Potomac, and then it just goes straight down the river. No one survived that. No one can survive that. It's terrific. Hopefully, whatever comes out of this tragedy, we will discover what the mistake was, human error, technology. I suspect it was human error. I'm not sure what happened there. It just goes to show you, ladies and gentlemen, the critical importance of air traffic control. When I was a young man in high school, I was trying to figure out what I would do with my life because I didn't own the farm that I worked on, and I had no money, lived in poverty, didn't have money to go to university, and I said, what am I going to do? I said, well, President Reagan fired the air traffic controllers when they went on strike because they were a national security asset, and he fired them. And we use military air traffic controllers and retired ones to keep the airspace open, and before we train more air traffic controllers. So air traffic control is a high-stress job. It paid very well at the time. Over $50,000 a year for a starting air traffic controller, which was a shockingly high figure when the per capita income, GDP, was somewhere around $18,000, if I recall correctly, maybe 20. And so I decided I wanted to be an air traffic controller. So when I finished my first year at university and decided I was wasting my time because I was too young and not prepared, I went in the Army and I requested to be an air traffic controller in the Army. Unfortunately, everyone else had the same idea, and I could have become an air traffic controller, but I would have had to wait 1 year and 6 months to enter the Army before I would be in the pipeline to go to school to become an air traffic controller. As a consequence, I decided that I would not become an air traffic controller because I needed a job then, not a year and a half later. Yeah, I think the night vision goggles can play a massive part in this accident. It's really hard to judge distance in a brightly lit object like this. Yeah. Well, also, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. The night vision goggles may wind up being the culprit here because not only is it difficult to see, I've used those night vision goggles. The ones the pilots use are slightly different than the PBS-7s that we use for foot soldiers, but the same technology. I've used them, and when you get light, it washes out your screen. It's difficult to discern things. So that very may well be the price, or maybe very part of the problem here. Yes, the Democrats will make political points with this. They'll accuse Trump of cutting the federal government, and they will make a lot of hay off this tragedy, and that's the sad part here. Looks to be about 300 feet or 15 seconds for it. Yes, Arctic, that's exactly right. Around 292, 306 feet, somewhere in there is when the impact occurred. And that's a normal flight level for the helicopters to keep them out of the commercial airspace. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I can see me and you having a friendly chat on ground frequency. My cousin survived a helicopter crash. Even if you survive, the damage to your body is... Yeah, well, it depends on how severe the crash is. We had a very serious air mishap when I was in an aviation unit in Germany. We had a Cobra that had engine failure. There's only one engine on the Cobra. It had an engine failure, and we did what's called an auto rotation. Well, we didn't. I wasn't there. I flew down. I was actually just there, left, and came back because of the mishap. But the Cobra at the training center at Grafenwehr had a engine failure, and they were in the air. I forget the altitude, but it wasn't 10 feet. It was somewhat higher than that, 150 feet, maybe higher. And what happens is you have a process called auto rotation, in which you release the blades to let the blades spin, let momentum carry them. and allow it to hopefully slow you down for the impact, the crash impact, as much as you can slow down. The pilots survived it. They were okay. It wasn't that high. It could have been far worse had they gotten much more altitude before the thing failed on them. What is catastrophic failure of the engine? And of course, the Army Aviation takes these investigations quite seriously. I remember a horrific situation in which we have something on the Black Hawk helicopter called the ESSS. At least that's what it used to be called. Those are the auxiliary external fuel tanks for additional fuel. And typically VIP aircraft, not this one, but aircraft similar to this, Blackhawks, will have them mounted on both sides, and they carry hundreds of pounds of fuel so they can extend the range. We had those commonly in place in Germany, and we had a very bad situation before a Battle Command Training Program exercise, a BCTP, in Germany back in the early 1990s, in which we lost general officers, colonels, and actually a friend of mine, Bud Rasmussen, was on that flight. He was a military intelligence, I think, captain or major at the time, and he was in the aircraft. It flew to Wiesbaden, and what had happened is that the shuttlecock apparently had malfunction. And so instead of feeding fuel from both tanks simultaneously, the pilots, not knowing this, flying in the air, were drawing the fuel from just one of the external tanks. So that when the aircraft came in to land and they banked, the weight pulled the aircraft into the ground and exploded. And truly horrific situation. Several people burned to death in this horrible situation. Bud Rasmussen was badly burned. He survived. The crew chief also survived, but the pilots were killed, and also people injured in the other aircraft. There were 2 aircraft that came in. It was just before a major exercise, and these were the intelligence officer for the Corps, the operations officer of the Corps, 2-star general, 1-star general, if I recall correctly. It was a truly sad occasion. I personally knew the lieutenant colonel who was the investigating officer for that investigation. He was in our general purpose aviation battalion, this 2227 or 7227 aviation regiment in Hanau, and he investigated that crash, and that's why I know so many of the details about it. Of course, the report also became available in the Army, but I know because I understood as it went along. A truly horrific situation. Human hubris. We take for granted getting in a plane and flying from Joburg to Dubai, or Dubai to London, or to Berlin or Amsterdam. And we forget the mechanical requirements, the maintenance, the upkeep, the fueling, the air traffic control, the weather, nature, all the things that play a role in whether we arrive safely at our destination. And when you take in consideration things like not just jet aircraft, but prop aircraft, and then you throw in things that have no business being in the air that beat atoms into submission with blades called helicopters, it's truly amazing that we actually fly at all, let alone what Elon Musk is doing with Starship. Just say thank you to the 1,000 highly qualified air crews and controllers who keep aviation safer than ever. It is. It's the safest form of transportation. And I know that sounds ironic telling you about this after a horrific situation occurred last night, but it is. I mean, the number of fatalities and injuries in aviation, all aviation, not just commercial aviation, is infinitesimal compared to road safety deaths. We had so many people died on the roads in South Africa over the holidays. Yep. Chris survived a motorcycle crash at 186 kilometers an hour. Good God. That's insane, Chris. Why are you driving that fast in a motorcycle? I'm glad you survived, though. Exactly the point. ATC is not easy. Page through the training modules. A friend who was studying for that. Any possible incident, you get isolated, drug, and alcohol. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. They were immediately pulled aside after redirecting traffic and administered drug and alcohol tests. No doubt about that. Yep. TCAS will be in focus after this. It's a great system, but has limitations. Yeah, I think you're right about that. There's going to be a lot of things in focus here, Arctic. We'll talk about that. All right, folks, I'm going to wrap up here and stretch my legs. Hang around. We're going to do the news. I'll start the hour. I got to get set up to make sure we have the feed. And if Trump goes live at the top of the hour, I'll cover it. If not, I'll begin with South Africa's news of the day. And then at the top of the next hour, Neil DeBeer will be joining us. We're going to be talking about what's going on in South Africa. That's always interesting. So thanks, folks. Yeah, Trump is in 9 minutes, so we're going to end it here. Thank you, Mary Jo. Thank you for joining us. Do you remember Jordanian pilot? I do not remember that one, Pablo Charlie. Oh, the wheel had already locked up. All right. Night qualifying training. Yes, Tony Nash. Army pilots are required to be able to fly at night. They fly with night vision goggles in helicopters. So, yeah. they have to be able to fly. I'll tell you a story one time. I've told it before about flying back in a helicopter from the training center back to Hanau. And I'm not a pilot, and I never flown an aircraft, but I know terrain. And we flew past the airfield twice. Next thing I knew, we were almost in Frankfurt, which is about 10, 15 minutes away from Hanau, about 6 minutes by aircraft. And so I get on the headset because the pilot was a warrant officer. Chief, where are we going? Are we going to Frankfurt? I know, sir. We just missed approach. We missed approach on a helicopter. How do you miss approach on a helicopter at night when there's no one on the airfield? Civilian pilots have to do 3 night landings and takeoffs within the last 90 days to stay current. There you go. It's the same in the military. You've got to do this stuff. So, all right. We'll be with you back in a few minutes. Be sure to hit the like button, folks. And by the way, I want to thank everybody who's watched my Donald Trump video last night. I tried to be very fair, but just point out the challenges the ANC is putting in front of South Africans. And that video is now at 52,000 views, 600 new subscribers. Thank you for that. 5,000 views in the last hour. It's slowing down a little bit, but 52,000 views. That will soon be my best performing video of the year. Very grateful for that. And we've pushed past 23,000 subscribers. I guess I need to keep updating people on the perils of pissing off the Teflon Don. All right, folks, we'll see you in a few minutes right back here. God bless. Don't run off. Stretch your legs. And we'll see you hopefully with Donald Trump in a few minutes. Cheers.